to another edition of the Physiotutors Podcast. Today we have Nick Hanna from Canada, and we're going to be talking about the biopsychosocial model of physiotherapy, or physical therapy where he is, Canada. Nick is a physio, graduated in 2015, his master's, and also done a bachelor's in kinesiology in 2013. Nick, I've tried to keep it a bit short and sweet. Why don't you give us a quick little intro into yourself, and then let's jump straight into it.
For sure. Thanks, Sonny. You captured most of it, I think. So, I am indeed a physiotherapist in Canada. And I graduated out of a small town, smaller city called London. Not the cool London in the UK.
Yeah, represent.
That's right. Yeah. The Canadian London in Ontario. I've been practicing for the last 4 years in private practice and in a clinic in the city. And yeah, man, that's it. That's me. I do have a social media account, which has gained me, I guess, some attention, which is why I do podcasts with the Physiotutors, etc. I'm sure that'll come up. But more recently, I just kind of started a landing page for a website I'm in the midst of working on. And then I've got a couple other projects that I'm working on, slowly revealing into 2020. So pretty excited, man.
Okay.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate you.
No, thank you for being able to arrange it and get on with us. Let's jump straight into it. The biopsychosocial model. What is that? It's something that I know in my studies we touched on ever so briefly, in that, hey, this exists, and then the slide was already gone. But I know, like I mentioned to you in the emails when I first got in touch, it's something that's becoming a lot more apparent in UK physiotherapy, and I think it's beginning to become more popular in the Netherlands as well. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I'll do my best. I'll give my best stab. So I think if I were to summarize it very briefly, it's a way to study health or disease in a person by acknowledging them as a cohesive whole. And so I think it was George Engel out of the late 70s who introduced the model. And it kind of, its name really speaks to what it is. So it's an acknowledgement of an interconnection between biological, psychological, and social factors in a cohesive whole that emerge to, derive health or pathology. And so one way, because we as human beings like to compartmentalize things and think of things in little boxes as a means of studying and better understanding, I think we like to put in our heads 3 different categories, like biological, psychological, social. Like I just did it. That's how I started talking about it, when the interpretation of the model isn't quite that at all. It shouldn't be dichotomized into biological and then psychosocial, or it shouldn't be trichotomized into those 3 categories. The way I make sense of it, I kind of stole this from somebody, but if you were to take 3 pieces of Play-Doh that were 3 different colors, symbolizing those 3 different categories, and you mash them all together and started mixing them up into one cohesive whole, that would be, the model that we're practicing under. And so it's really just an acknowledgement of a person as a complex ecosystem and not a bag of bones with a brain and tissues. It's more, how our biological entity emerges in the context and the environment in which we live, how we think, and how those things interconnect. And yeah, so really summarizing it is looking at the whole person and not, a particular area of the body or a particular area of the mind or a particular context. It's really the emergent, cohesive whole that makes up the complexity of who we are.
Okay, so it's really, taking that holistic viewpoint of treating the patient as more than just your knee, your ankle, and looking at what are their driving factors, their motivating factors outside of that in their day-to-day life and any limitations. Sorry, I'm half thinking in Dutch as I'm speaking. It's really confusing. Um, yeah, and putting that all together and, like you say, not separating it out. So not having sort of Venn diagram thing of
Hmm.
individual components, but really mixing it all together and getting
That's
it
right.
holistic.
I think we have to talk about things separately in order to have a conversation about it. Um, but I mean, a simple example would be how, depending on the context, a stress response might affect physiology very differently. And so you could have a thought in a context drive a different physiological response in your body. And so that sort of starts to touch on how like things get complex very quickly, and there's a lot of uncertainty into what we do clinically, I think. And so the more we can become okay with the fact that, um, a lot of what we know, or a lot of what we do, we don't quite know for sure why it works the way it does. We just have these models that, hope to explain and capture what we're doing, but we all know that no model is perfect, including the biopsychosocial model. It certainly has its limitations, and um, but I think it's a good starting point to just clinically look at a person with a, casting a broader net,
Mm.
so to speak. So you might, with your example with an ankle or a knee, like we most certainly should look at the ankle and the knee and any mechanisms that perhaps, if there was an acute injury, drove that injury. But then you have to understand what are the thoughts and beliefs behind that person, and where they are, and how is that going to dictate their behavior and drive perhaps the things that they're going to do outside the clinic that may or may not be favorable to their outcomes. And then you have to understand the context that they're going to be living in outside of and in the clinic, and how are those interactions with friends, family, or lack thereof going to dictate and drive where they're going to go with their outcomes. Um, so the, I guess, less optimistic viewpoint would be like, holy shit, there's a lot to consider. Um, but the optimistic viewpoint, is looking at things from a point of, I have a lot of options here, that I can discuss and help this person through. And so the reason I like the model is that it, because it's broader, it certainly gives you more options to work with a person clinically, and more options to help them and help them help themselves, quite frankly.
Okay, so what would you say for someone who's just trying to start utilizing this would be key ideas for them to have in the back of their mind while I'm assuming it's through the interview process they're going to be getting these different aspects and components about a person's life. What would you say are key things that someone should have in the back of their heads?
It's a great question. I think where it would stem from, certainly in my practice, is just how you go about asking questions, during an interview of somebody, or a history taking of somebody that you first meet. And like I said, you just want to try and cast your net broader, and so you want to get a better understanding of, what they're engaged in, socially, their likes, their dislikes. Do they have family? Where are they living? What kind of friends they have? You want to consider things like adequate sleep. You can sort of touch on, it's certainly not our expertise, but you can touch on aspects of nutrition, etc. And then the more touchy subjects might be, thoughts and beliefs and concerns. And I try my best to not directly ask that kind of stuff right off the get-go. because you can screen some of those beliefs a little bit with questionnaires before people come in.
Mm-hmm.
And so really a combination of asking better questions, more open-ended, to try and get a sense of what they think is going on, why they think they're in the current situation, how favorable they think their outcomes are going further, their context, their environment. And then certainly what we do clinically is very, biological and physiological in what we're looking for. I think the combination of those three things starts to acknowledge, more of a cohesive, more of a well-rounded and broader spectrum first interaction.
Okay. I definitely want to tackle that, tackling somebody else's belief system, but we'll come to that a little bit later.
Sure, man.
I think an important question as we're getting deeper into it is, do you think this approach is appropriate for all types of patients? Do you think that this is an approach that everybody should use, can use, etc.?
Yeah. Yes, Sonny. if you're working with a person, sure. I mean, like, yeah, if they have a brain and if they have a body and they live in an environment, then you most definitely should. It doesn't matter. Every single person you work with is complex. It doesn't matter if they're an elite athlete or, an 80-year-old grandma who's lost the ability to go grocery shopping independently. Like the principles of the model stay inherently the same. The meaning that they derive in their life and the wants that they want to get out of therapy might differ slightly, but your principles are always going to be the same in the fact that you're trying to find what's meaningful and what's important in their life. And then as a physiotherapist, what that really boils down to is like, what can I do to aid you, and what can I help you to do to help yourself get back to the things physically and functionally that are important to you and where you derive meaning from. So yeah, like the model won't change depending on who you see. The questions might change, and the way you go about subjects might change depending on the person in front of you, their comfortability, looking for signs of disinterest or if you're not connecting well and vibing well, then your approach has to differ in how much you tiptoe the line with certain questioning or certain areas of information. But at the end of the day, the more information you come to know about a person, the more you're going to be able to help them. And again, help them help themselves, because that's what we're trying to do, become real agents of behavior change, which is really hard, man. Like, I think about how hard it is to change some of my own behaviors, and then I don't feel so bad when my clientele aren't coming through all the time with the things that I expect them to do. I'm a lot more forgiving now, and I'm a lot better at seeing myself in them, and I think that helps a lot. So yeah, the model really sees other people as human beings and complex, cohesive wholes, and it applies to everyone.
That little bit that you touched on at the end there of seeing yourself and your patient and acknowledging, actually, I struggle to change my own behaviors from time to time. How did you find implementing the biopsychosocial model into your own practice? Did you use that from the jump, from the get-go, or was that something that was brought into your style of physio later down the line?
Yeah, I don't know, man. That's a great question. I was certainly not. I was like Mr. Biomechanics coming out of school. Like I was, looking at everybody and hip hinging and, correcting valgus, and it was all good. The glory days, those were the glory days.
I use
when
that
shit
still.
Was a lot more black and white. And now we're dancing in gray every day. So I can't honestly tell you when I had my awakening. And I mean, the biopsychosocial model doesn't even, like, I've since started reading more. I don't know if you're familiar with an activist approach to pain or an activism. We don't even have to go into that shit, man. It kind of builds on the biopsychosocial model even more, addresses some of its limitations.
I'd be lying if I said I'd heard of it. So
man, just stay out of the weeds for a bit. You'll be a happier person.
Fair.
The more I read and try and understand about pain, the more uncertain and upset I get in all the right ways. But yeah, it's there's a lot of complexity out there. But to answer your question, coming full circle, when did I switch? You know, I hate to give credit to another fellow Canadian, but I'm probably gonna. I think a huge driving force behind my change was Greg Lehman.
Okay,
I just started reading some of his blogs, and I knew who he was because he was a former student of Stuart McGill.
Yeah.
And I was too. And so I kind of stumbled onto Greg's website, and then one blog at a time, I started realizing how backwards what I was doing was. So I think, I'll give him some credit. There's certainly other stuff. It's the internet, man.
It's a place of wonders. You can find a lot there.
Yeah. Wonders, joys, sadness, happiness, everything.
It depends what area of Reddit you're in, I think.
Yeah. I try to stay ignorant, man. I'm happier.
That's for sure. You touched on pain, and like I mentioned in the questions that I sent you, anyone that's literally spent longer than 5 seconds going through your Insta, as I promised I did from my research as well, knows that you talk a lot about pain science. How do you go about implementing that into your own personal practice? Because I find that's a touchy subject to bring to patients personally, as you can find that sometimes you can trigger them into getting too pain focused, and then every little niggle is, oh, I shouldn't do it. I'm going to stop the exercise. A little bit's okay, but yeah, how have you find touching on that subject, in your practice?
It's a good question. I don't certainly in my practice, like, pain science isn't a thing. It's not a thing that I'm not the big straw man argument is like, oh, you just talk to your patients about pain. And so I'm certainly not an expert on pain science. I do my best to learn as much as I can. And like I just finished saying, the more I'm learning about it, the more uncertain I'm becoming about its emergence. And, we could talk about pain models if you want. I would rather talk about what my understanding of pain has really done for my practice, because I think there's more clinical utility in that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
With you saying that,
we could talk pain models, man, and I'm just going to get in the weeds. It's going to be great. It's going to be too much.
Like I say, if you're saying that the more you read on it, the more uncertain you're becoming, I genuinely use a lot of your content and use that for things to go with. So if you're already getting lost with it, then I'd probably be this.
Well, can I ask you a question, man? How long have you been practicing?
So I've been practicing for a little over a year and a half now.
Nice. Okay, good for you, man. Yeah. Talk to me. We'll talk. Talk. It'll be good. But so just the big, if I were to take just a couple really key takeaways from learning about pain and how it's really shifted clinical practice for me, the biggest thing is language and how I go about explaining things and talking to people and framing things, if I can sort of go further with that. So we know that like I did this video a couple of years ago on the nocebo effect, which is an adverse effect on health that's derived sort of clinically from interactions with health professionals. And every single day, like it happened today again, the unfortunate reality is that I have people coming through my doors who have been seen by other health professionals and medical professionals, and whether it was a lack of attention to detail or a lack of their own recognition of their messaging, has inadvertently scared the shit out of this person. And so it's the fear and the thought behind what they feel might be going on that often drives the behavior that can lead to really poor outcomes, whether it's fear avoidance behavior, thinking that pain is all about tissue injury, etc., which we know that oftentimes the two are poorly correlated, except when they're not. And then
a tear's a tear.
It's messy. Yeah.
Grade 3 tear is a grade 3 tear.
100%. Yeah. That shit is completely tore. No.
Yeah.
So, yeah, unfortunately, like I'll give an example today. There was an individual I saw, a younger female, 25 years old, about 4 to 5 weeks ago. She was driving with a few stops, like for over 8 hours, to a city, staying the weekend in said city, and then having to commute back as well. So 2 bouts of very long periods of immobility in the form of sitting. I don't want to, bastardize sitting. I don't think it's the worst thing for a person, but
it's the new smoking. Haven't you heard?
Yeah, that's right. It's the not moving part that I think is the problem. But so she, without giving too much detail, was developing sort of right-sided lower back pain, and based on what I assessed today, a little bit of radicular pain into her right leg. And she had been seen by two separate health professionals, a chiropractor, a massage therapist. In no way, disclaimer, am I going to make this to be a bashing of chiros or massage therapists. I'm just speaking to what happened today. Disclaimer. So
we can mute the words chiro and massage if you'd like.
So the problem she derived from the chiropractor was there was no real explanation for what was going on. Received a couple manipulations on the second bout, ended up having a little bit more of a flare-up of symptom. And then seeing the massage therapist, one of the things that came out was during a, sort of a palpatory exam down her erector spine, I would assume like palpating just adjacent to her spinous process, the massage therapist said something to the effect of that, that doesn't feel right. Something's a little bit amiss here. It led to her seeking emergency care, being assessed in Emerge, having x-rays done, etc. And so all of this is to say that had those 2 particular individuals just slowed down and simply asked, okay, what is it you're looking for? And if they were to ask that question, they'd find out they just want to know what could be going on. And I said, okay, we're going to do an assessment today, and I'm going to say what the likely scenario is of what the problem is. And that's it. So we assess for, any potential indicators of sinister pathology. There was none of that. And so we start to explain to her, like, it looks to be a sensitive nerve. There's many issues that can drive that. There's many things that could be going on. We know that it doesn't take much for nerves to stay sensitive and be grumpy, but often these are self-limiting problems, and often that they get better. That's it. And so as soon as we talk about the issues of language, you could just, my little bit of a positive reframe for her, I think, is going to be the difference between her, spiraling out of control and her getting better. So coming full circle to this pain science discussion, if we know that the likelihood of something sinister is not there in our assessment, sort of ruling out and monitoring for red flags, then we should use every opportunity in our assessment, our treatment, or any interaction to frame a positive narrative for that person and make sure that they know all the positives. they should be aware of the negatives too, right? If they're there, we need to be realistic. But we need to frame things positively so that that shapes their own thought process and their behavior outside of the clinic. So that's number one, language. And then the only other thing that I wanted to say is that the other big piece of me learning about pain science is this whole pain doesn't always equal tissue damage thing, because everybody thinks they're damaged. Everybody thinks they're broken. They think an increase in pain must mean that things are getting worse. They think severity of pain is an indication of how severe the problem is. We know these things don't always line up. Sometimes they do, but we know they don't always line up. And so if people know that, you start to challenge their previous thoughts about where things really are, and more on that, just how optimistic they can be going forward. So those are like the huge, two big clinical influences of me learning more about pain. Is just language with people, and that hurt doesn't always equal harm. There's many more, of course, but like those are the huge ones. Those are the two like big pieces that I think people need to know and need to apply clinically.
Okay, that's nice. Going back to the belief system, said we touch on it a little later. Language is important. 100%. I'm totally down with that. And I have a lot of patients that come to me and say, "Oh, I've been told I can't do this anymore. I should never make this movement, or I can't do this." So they take that I can't do this to be for the rest of my life. I can't do this. I can no longer squat deeper than 90 degrees or something like that.
Yeah.
If you watch them sit on a chair, that chair's already taken their knees past 90 degrees and their knee didn't explode or their ankle didn't fall off. But how do you go about tackling those belief systems? It's something that I struggle with, and there's people that are close to myself that I struggle to overcome their belief systems, friends and family and that sort of thing. And it's, don't treat family. There's always that guideline. But what about tackling those belief systems that people come up with?
Yeah, like that's probably one of the hardest things that we might be faced with doing. And I want to start by saying it's not always necessary. If it's not getting in the way of their goal at the end of the day, and it doesn't come up and you don't foresee it being that huge of a deal, it's not always necessary to confront somebody about their belief system. We're naturally very tribalistic, and an attack on your beliefs is an attack on your tribe, and you get that kickback effect really, really easily. And you think about your own beliefs, like when people challenge them, you get pretty pissed. At least I do.
Yeah, definitely.
But that's because it's because of my lizard brain. But
the Abdullah Ablangara.
That's right. A really good friend, colleague, and mentor of mine, his name's Jim Millard. He's another physio in my community. He's been practicing for over 30 years. He'd be a good guy to interview, FYI.
Taking down the name as we speak.
Yeah, 100%. So he likes to say that change only happens at the speed of trust. If you're going to start to poke against somebody's beliefs and their belief systems, then they damn well better trust you if they're going to take what you're going to say with any weight. And so the first question I would have for a clinician, if they're going to try and tackle a belief, is, does that person trust you? And then you got to think like, okay, how long does it take to establish trust? And if you've ever been in a relationship, well, then just think about that. How long did it take for you to fully trust that person?
Yeah.
Like what we're asked to do clinically is so hard, and people who come at like other people again, like, and their belief systems day one, that's just like, that's therapeutic alliance suicide right there. Like, good luck. I'll just go somewhere else where somebody actually cares what I have to say and believes me. So what you should do is like use your first few sessions and, take a bank of all these beliefs that come out there. They're going to come out. Just put them on the back burner. Just jot, like, mental note, jot that shit down. Just be like, okay, I'm going to maybe revisit this in the future if it's appropriate. And if I think that they could derive some real important changes outside the clinic, they could really put what I have to say to practice. And I think that's going to benefit them in their pursuit of their goal. So trust has to happen first. Okay. Then I sort of have this 4-step system for tackling a belief if I'm going to do it at all. And so that would be as follows. If you're going to challenge a belief, number one, you have to know what it is. So just ask, what do you think is going on? Ask about their ideas, ask about their thoughts. And you do so empathetically, right? Like non-judgmentally. Empathy is the ability to consider and take the perspective of another person and then withhold judgment. And it's the second part that I think a lot of human beings have a real problem with. It's just like, oh, you think that, you idiot? Like we kind of have that deep down, right? And it's just like, oh, how could you think that? And meanwhile, you and I, Sonny, we probably have some stupid ass beliefs right now, like that we aren't even aware of.
100%.
So, I mean, yeah. So you gotta consider what they're saying using empathy, and remember that they have good reasons, likely, for believing what they do. So that's number one, find out what it is. And then number two is inquire. I guess not. So yeah, find out what it is, and then try to find out and understand why they have that. So that's really tackling somebody's epistemology, figuring out why somebody believes what they do, which is the important question, I think, because a lot of people, maybe they derive it from, anecdote, maybe they derive it from friends and family, maybe they've had an experience and they thought this is what happened, right? So again, figuring out the why. And then the third part of that is probably the most important part, which is the validation aspect. I can totally understand why you think that, given what you've been through. That makes a lot of sense to me. So that's where that empathy piece comes back in. And again, we have good reasons for believing things. People aren't inherently stupid. They don't. Yeah, that's another. Yeah, maybe that's another conversation for another day.
We could probably do another podcast on that.
Yeah, how smart are humans? So validate them, validate their experiences. If we're talking about trust, like if you're not validating why they're feeling what they're feeling, why they're thinking what they're thinking, what they're experiencing, what they're doing, then they're really, really not going to care about what you have to say. And then the last part of that is asking permission to offer an alternative viewpoint. If they don't want to hear it, then that's okay. Then just leave it alone. And, you've planted a seed now for another day. And if they do want to hear it, then that's great. But an important question that might be something to consider for you clinically is asking them what it would take for them to see something a different way. What evidence do you need on my end to show you that what you think might not actually be what's going on? And having that evidence to back up your education can be powerful. But again, if this isn't built upon a true connection that's built on trust, I mean, it doesn't matter. Like you don't want to hear what another person has to say that confronts you if you don't trust them and if they don't think you have their best intentions in mind. And so, yeah, it's a good idea to find out what it would take to change their mind or see things a different way, offer the explanation, and then ask what they think about it. So how does that sound? Does it make sense? Maybe it doesn't. But that would be sort of a good clinical framework for going about belief confrontation. And quite honestly, it shouldn't happen for weeks. Because if you don't have the trust, and it takes so much time, some people it's very quick, some people it's a long, long time. You got to make that judgment call as to whether or not it's worth your clinical relationship. A lot of times it's not. And you can really you'll see the nonverbal signs show up if somebody's pissed off and they don't want to hear it, right? Like they'll fold their arms.
Yeah.
They'll kind of lean back. They'll get away from you. They'll start looking around the room. They'll look at their watch. They'll shuffle towards the door. Like you'll see oftentimes you'll hear the big sigh. like they're just like, oh shit. And
It's
if
at
you're
that point
starting
they
to,
don't even want to hide it, right?
yeah, yeah. And if you start to pick up on those things, and the more you practice, you'll see them. Then it's best to just leave it all together, change the subject, tell them how awesome their shirt is or their socks.
I should have done that last week. I can, yeah, that happened with myself and a patient. You could see right off the bat, someone that I did wait a few weeks to touch on the subject with. I thought we built up a relationship, some trust, things were going well. I could see as soon as I broached the subject of trying to educate him.
You drop that truth nuke,
Yeah,
the atomic bomb
it
of
did not
truth,
go
and it
down
just
good.
was too much,
Yeah.
man. It was just too much. It happens, dude. Welcome to the uncertainty of clinical life. It's a good time.
Yeah, at least it's not a party of one, that's for sure. Yeah.
Hell no, man. We're all out here having a real good uncertain time. We're all struggling struggling forward though.
I feel like that's a title of a Rick and Morty episode or something. An uncertain time.
Maybe.
So, look, can you give us any more patient sort of examples that you've had where maybe it's been a difficult one to broach that you can talk about, that you can touch on, where we can sort of see what your process was step by step?
Trying to think of some good ones, man. I don't want to just like draw out this just talk to this conversation for hours and hours. Would it be helpful if I maybe talk about a scenario where it didn't really go so well, where like some of the lessons that we might think are useful aren't useful? Like I'm thinking about something more recently that happened where I actually used some of my content from my Instagram page, and it's on me, right? Like I showed it, and then they sort of ran with it, and it kind of led to a worse outcome.
Yeah, I
Is
think
that
that's.
cool?
I I think there's two things. One, it shows us something where it doesn't go so well, and it's also, yeah, it's nice that someone's willing to be so open and honest with the audience of, hey, these are my not so positive experiences, because it's not often people want to broach on those.
Hell yeah, man. Dude, it's the
It's the learning moment.
thing, it's the situations where things don't work out. Those are the most
Yeah,
important things. There's a lot of lessons. There's a lot of lessons from success for sure, but the failures are the stepping
yeah, for
stones.
sure.
So yeah, and I like to think my Instagram's all amazing and evidence informed and great, and it is, but
Disclaimer:
but
it is, but
it is, by the way, but doesn't always work out. So yeah, I was more recently working with a younger nurse, and she had an acute episode of back pain. This sucks. All my examples are back pain, but that's okay. It's one of the
yeah, has
most
a lot of
common things.
beliefs around it as well. Yeah.
Damn right. So she was, I mean, I'm going to just go ahead and say it. There's going to be people who critique this, but she was showing more of a discogenic
Okay.
type of presentation, if
Yeah,
you will.
yeah,
She had a directional preference. She was flexion intolerant. It peripheralized her symptoms when she flexed. She could centralize with repeated bouts of extension,
mm-hmm.
etc. So that's the setup. And I was going through, because she was very concerned about the intensity of her pain. And I had more recently done like a big sort of 9-part series about back pain. And I was asking her, I was like, do you want to know more about back pain? Like, I can give you some information if you'd like. She'd be like, and she said, yeah, that was great. And so, not thinking how, like, this is so stupid of me. I should remember that when we're working clinically, and it always equals one, it's always individual. And that just because you're sputing some evidence-based generalities, it doesn't always apply to the individual. And so me not thinking, in the moment, I was like, yeah, go through the series. It's great. You'll learn a ton and it'll be all good. And one of the things that I had put in that series was what to do if you have an acute episode of low back pain. And I think one of the things is keep moving. And I think I said something to the effect of motion is lotion, which is one of our favorite little rhymes to say clinically, which is going to work for a vast number of people. A lot of people are going to love it. So she read that and she thought, oh, I'm just going to go keep doing my thing. And that, again, in the wrong person reading that information, she took it as, I can just go do whatever the hell I want and it's going to be great.
Go do a CrossFit session.
Which is a huge fuck up. It's a huge fuck up on my part. Am I allowed to swear?
Cool.
Can you bleep it out?
Go balls to the walls.
Okay. Sorry.
No worries.
So she was like doing laundry. She was cleaning her house. She was like all good. And then like just loving life. And then the next time she came in, she had a huge like lateral list. Like she was shifted to the side like so bad. And she was more peripheralized. And I was like, oh. And I was like, what happened? She was like, I did what you told me. I kept moving. Motion is lotion. I was like, oh, damn, this is the time when motion maybe had a threshold and motion became not lotion and it became more of a very provocative.
She threw your insane right
she just
back
kept
at you,
doing
man.
things 100%. So it's a good N equals 1 lesson, right? Sometimes we might have to put transient limits on movement for the betterment of our client. And so thankfully she's awesome. and she was like very lighthearted and good spirited and she didn't really mind. And since that time she's been doing a lot better and it's all good. But yeah, there's like a good sort of scenario of like when what the evidence is telling us, which I agree with, keep moving in terms of acute low back pain, doesn't always fit clinically. You got to be a little bit more mindful about how you educate. And I just said, yeah, check out my series, which is so stupid because it's very generalized. And what applies to the population and what we study doesn't necessarily apply to the person. And so it was a good lesson for me. It made me question like, oh, geez, who's reading my content? I was like, geez, am I making people worse? But that's just the risk you take putting content out and put my disclaimers up.
Put them in bold at the top. There you go.
Yeah, haven't gotten sued yet. So
don't put that idea out there.
Fingers crossed.
Knock on wood.
Is that helpful though? I mean, I hear like I don't want to talk about all the positive. Like it's good to talk about the positive and the success and like, oh, I applied BPS and it was the best time ever. But the failures are so much more important, I think, too.
I think it's something that not only you yourself can learn from, but when the guys and girls listening to this hear that story and they hopefully it will turn a switch that they'll be able to say, actually, yeah, he's bang on the money there. You can't just say motion is lotion to every single back pain patient. You have to then take that holistic approach of that patient in front of you and make sure you give them those limitations, because you're going to get patients who are way more likely to go excess. You're going to get patients who are going to hear that and say, hey, yeah, no, go 100%. I mean, hit the gym, and then they're going to come back and they're going to come back in bits. I said to a patient, it's been a little while now. You can start doing some gentle jogging, blah, blah, blah. Make sure you keep it in line with the amount that we're currently working out now. Just do sets of sort of a couple times 5 minutes, whatever. Ended up doing it every day, and he came back and his knee swollen up like a balloon. Yeah, what happened? I was doing my training 3 times a week. Okay. And then I did the running every day. Great. Yeah.
Yeah, man. The green light. You gave the green light. Some people just take it and run with it. Yeah.
I should have.
Quite vigilant. Those persistent copers, man.
Absolutely.
Love it.
Okay, grand. Yeah. And have you got any others that you're willing to share? So I was on a elbow course recently, and it was one of the things that I found most useful from one of the presenters when he was talking about the failures that he's had. Because he said himself, yeah, that was a great moment for me to learn that, hey, this isn't always going to work. This isn't always going to be appropriate, etc. Any others that you might be able to share some nuggets of wisdom with us?
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly had a more recent experience with somebody who, has, I think, like some medial knee joint symptom, and it's somebody who I've talked about, what knee surgeries and knee surgery outcomes often look like, and that generally some, if we look at the evidence, it would suggest that any surgeries done on a meniscus, whether it's partial meniscectomy or et cetera, the outcomes are no more favorable than conservative management over time. At least I think. Maybe
you're bang on the money, but I have my personal gripes with those. But yeah,
for sure. And so sometimes you go through experiences clinically where you feel like you're on the same wave as the person you're working with, and you do have your struggles clinically, and you have your ups and downs, and you have your symptom flares and bumps in the road. But this is a person who their trajectory has been favorable over the last 3 months, and everything was good, and we had talked a little bit about surgery and versus doing the work and conservative care and exercise, and met with a surgeon and then pulled trig on the surgery like instantly. And again, it's just another example that you're not always going to, despite your best efforts, have the positive influence you want. And importantly, in that, not to take things personally, because you never quite know what's going on in their own head, and to not judge, which is so hard. Like in that circumstance, my gut reaction, my gut emotions are like, oh, like, no, like what were you thinking? What are you doing? But now it's the approach now is like, okay, we're going to get you as ready for that surgery as we possibly can. You're going to be as strong and prepared for that surgery as you can possibly be. And then we're going to crush it on the other end as well. And so you don't want to take somebody's decision and, all of a sudden frame it negatively and say like, oh, you shouldn't have done that and this and that. Like they've made their decision. And so now you should make it your mission, working with them to do everything you can to make that surgical outcome favorable. And again, like that's sort of our role, is to get people back to what they love and what they find meaningful, but it's not our place to make the decisions for them at the end of the day. And so, when it really depends how you frame your interaction with a person. And I've said all along, well, not all along, but more recently, I'm not a fixer. I'm in your corner. I'm there to facilitate. I'm there to, be there for you, be your guide. But at the end of the day, like, you're the one who's got to go out and do the thing. And it's hard when people don't do what you want or what you think is going to be the most useful for them. But you have to understand that they're on their own journey. It's not your decision to decide like how they're going to go about their decisions and their lives. But despite their decisions, you have to sort of put personal feelings aside and personal beliefs aside, and really be there for them despite what they decide. So that was it's just a tough one to swallow, because you inherently you feel like a vested interest in a person when you're working alongside them and they're doing well. like you feel like, yeah, like we are crushing it.
It's
We are
our
doing it.
win together.
Yes. Yeah, perfectly said, man. Like you're creating something together that facilitates them, but when it goes sideways and kind of blindsides you like that, it's hard to not feel like you did something wrong, or what could I have done differently. But again, like these are just moments of important reflection, and maybe it didn't matter what we did, and that was going to be their trajectory in the end. But yeah, like I think every clinical interaction is an opportunity for some reflection and growth. But and every human interaction is you have the opportunity to do that. So you should work on getting better interacting with people everywhere. Every time you have an interaction, like I think is a good opportunity to get better at connecting with people. And I think that's the magic sauce. So, but yeah, that was a tough one, man.
For sure. I think I've had a similar experience actually with a patient of mine who, same thing. I was, for him in his situation, a little bit hesitant for him to go for the surgery, and I made that clear initially. Sort of his first visit to orthopedic surgeon, they said the same thing. Yeah, go for physio and then try it for 6 weeks. If you start to feel a difference, then hey ho, keep going with your rehab, and then if anything changes, come back. After 6 weeks, we were seeing progress. I thought we had some nice wins together. Getting to know the guy a little bit. You're seeing someone for 6 weeks. It's you start to feel close to your patient. You develop a bit of a bond with them. You get to know what's going on in their life, and then all of a sudden, I don't see him, and I get a message saying he's gone for the surgery. Yeah, it's a bit of a kick, but like you say, it's important not let it get to you, because as you said, it could be something else going on in their life at the time, and it's not necessarily to do with you. And post surgery, he did come back to myself for the rehab, so I couldn't have been doing too bad a job if he showed back up.
Yeah, he trusts you, man.
Or I'm just really close to home. It's one of the two.
It often helps to be close to someone's house. Forget trust, man. Proximity to house.
Proximity is key. Major key. DJ Khaled knows. It's
oh my days.
But so there's also another thing that you said there about not being a fixer, and I think that's a really important message that I heard you talk about previously, of even the idea of a toolbox makes us sound more like fixers and puts that idea into our head. And like you're saying, the whole point of the biopsychosocial model is the power of your words, the power of your language, and how you can use it all to help facilitate someone. If we're constantly putting into our heads of we are fixers and we've got our toolbox here, it just helps to facilitate that way of thinking. And I think that was a really powerful thing that you've mentioned on another podcast I was listening to prior.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that sounds like something I'd say. That's good. Yeah, I just don't like. There are a lot of clinicians who do view themselves that way, and it's fine. I don't fault them for that. I do think it's important. One of the reasons why I don't think I'm ever going to have that viewpoint is because of how much complexity and all the variables that exist in a person's life outside of the clinic, outside of your realm, that can be favorable or unfavorable to their outcome. And so we're really trying to nudge them in the right direction with that small clinical window that we have. But I even just read a paper recently talking about social determinants of health. And I think it was like 20% of the outcome is derived from medical care. So we would fit in medical care maybe. So 20%, And then you think, okay, and then we as physios maybe have 5 to 10% of the musculoskeletal pie. So 5 of 20, maybe 2% of an opportunity for a positive outcome. I don't know if my math's right. Maybe less. But so
1%.
so forget the
Yeah.
math. I'm not a mathematician. I probably screwed that up.
One.
But
Yeah.
the point is, you may have far less of an influence on their outcome than you think, or you may have far more, and you're probably never going to know. Probably never going to know. But if you view yourself as a fixer on the other side, and things don't go well, and again, this may or may not have had anything to do with what you're doing, their outcome. If you tie yourself to their outcome, you're in trouble, I think. But then you start to feel like, shit, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not helpful. And also, you kind of open up the door for them to put the blame on you if things don't go favorably. If you set the expectation that you're more of their guide, you're in their corner, you're there to facilitate, you're there to help them help themselves, what's meaningful to you, this is my role, this is how I'm going to help you get there and get back to that, with my own clinical expertise. That should, puts far less pressure on you clinically, I think, and it gives you a lot more freedom to be more malleable in your practice, approach things, coming full circle back to this BPS model, from casting a very wide net, and knowing that, if you're the fixer and they come in and they're having a rough day, you don't always have to do that technique or that tool or that skill. You can maybe just ask what they think is going to be best for them that day, because they know themselves way better than you ever will. And in that sense, if you're more just like their coach in the corner, I think you're going to have a better time clinically. You're going to feel a little bit more fuel, and a little more passion for a longer period of time, and have more fun in the clinic at the same time, which I don't know if a lot of people are, man. Like, I feel a lot of people are struggling. And I think it has in part to do with how they frame their interactions. Because when shit goes south and they aren't doing so good and they put it on you, it's like, well, okay, I guess I got to eat that. It's my fault. Which that plays a toll on you mentally. And I don't know what that's going to do for you outside the clinic if you're having all this doubt. I don't know. I just think personally and professionally, you start to dwindle over time. Whereas if you reframe things from more of a facilitator, coaching, in your corner perspective, then, you just have a little bit more clinical freedom and less pressure on yourself.
Okay, nice. What would you, or have you got any recommendations for anyone listening, for things that they could read, be it books, papers, or social media, like yourself, Hannah Moves? Anything that you can recommend to people if they wanted to start taking a look at this and maybe see if it's something that will work for them?
Yeah, so my studying and my interest more recently has been in how I can become a better interactor with people and connect better with people. And so I've done a lot of reading in more of a coaching world, like, and so I say the word coach, like, it's not like baseball coach or basketball coach. It's more like kind of life coaching and health coaching, etc. And so a couple books I've read are, I forget what it's called. It's like coactive coaching. I forget who are the authors were. There's another book I read called The Empowerment Dynamic, which is again, what we just kind of talked about, like how you frame your interactions. And more recently, I'm just starting to read a book. I know the author here. His name's James Borg. It's called Persuasion. Not like when people, well, persuasion gets kind of a negative connotation. It's like having favorable outcomes on both parties, that kind of persuading. So like how you can get people on your side, how you can build trust so that you can influence them. So really my learning as far as the BPS model more recently is like, how do I get better at interacting with people? And that is the most important part of our job, I think. And both verbally and non-verbally, like listening. People are pretty shit at listening. Seriously, man. Anybody who says they're a good listener, number one, is full of shit, and two, is probably really good at hearing and not listening.
Just waiting for a turn to go, like that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, listening. Well, people literally are very good at hearing. They're good at the physiological traveling of sound waves to their tympanic membranes. Nice. They're good at that.
Smooth.
I still know some anatomy. Whereas like listening is the taking everything in, the energy, the nonverbals, what they've said, and processing it within the context, and then considering that with the empathetic view of why they might be thinking that, and just letting it all sink in without judgment. That's listening. People aren't good at that, myself included. We default to hearing all the time, and our attention wavers all the time. Like we're so easily, falling into the limbo of our thinking minds, and like it's because we think 4 to 5 times faster than we can speak. So we're always ahead of the other person, and we can just let our minds wander. And yeah, I just think you need to get better at interacting with people. So listening is huge, and then educating is really important. Talking with story. People remember stories. They don't remember facts. They don't remember information. So if you can convey a feeling, if you can convey energy, if you can convey a story that relates to something that they've said, that's far more powerful than anything you could do to educate about an anatomy fact or a pain science fact, blah, blah, blah. And then if I can build on that, it's if you can, have the person that you're interacting with be the creator of what they want, then that's even more powerful. Even if it's not the most evidence-informed thing. Like, because people are far more willing to go along with the things that they've created. If we're looking at, self-determination theory and things like autonomy, people want autonomy in their decisions. They want to feel like they have a say. And so that's where this informed consent piece comes in. You're sort of offering a platter of options that you can do, the risks and the benefits, but then tie it in with shit that they like and let them decide and let them be the leaders. And then boom, that's the secret sauce right there. Then you're off to Therapeutic Alliance City.
I like it. I think that's a nice point for us to wrap up with. I think, yeah. But before we do, there are a couple of things you mentioned right at the very start. The website landing page that you're working on, you've got a couple of other projects. Is there anything that you can share with us now? And then after that, maybe tell us where people can reach you and sort of check out your stuff.
100%. All I'm going to say though is the hanamoves.com. That's all I'm going to let off the leash right now, because it's out. There's going to be tons of cool content through that page. And then I got a really big project that I'm starting to work on. And then I guess the only other thing I'm going to sort of tease a little bit is that I'm working on another project with 3 other colleagues who are legit and gems. And it's going to be all the spice you've ever seen in your life, because we're coming out hot fire. And 2020 is going to be So much spice, Sonny.
I'm
So
looking
much
forward to
spice.
it, man. I can see why you've
Yeah.
got that mic with the guard in front of it now, man. You're spitting
Bro,
bars.
everything. Got the mic. Yes. Hashtag Zachabor, so well intentioned. So well intentioned over here with the mic. When he hears this, he's gonna roll over. He's gonna be so upset when he hears that. It's an inside joke, but I give that guy a hard time every week.
Okay. Can we? You can't say too much about it. Any dates that we can start looking at and expecting things?
Ooh, like within the first month or two of the new year,
Okay.
so pretty soon. And yeah, and if you want to find me, like easiest is just Instagram. My tag is at Hannah Moves. Hannah is a palindrome for those who know what a palindrome is. Look that word
The
up.
front, baby.
Hannah, it's a palindrome.
Yeah.
Moves, all one word. Go get you
I
some.
guarantee you someone's going to look up Hannah. It's a palindrome moves right now. I promise you that. Yeah. All right. Lovely. Thanks. I really appreciate your time and appreciate you being able to fit us into your schedule.
Well, man, I appreciate you staying up all hours of the night to talk to this old Canuck here. And you're absolutely right. I far prefer your voice to those other goofs. And I really appreciate you setting this up and reaching out, man. It's been a lot of fun, and I look forward to more conversations in the future.
Absolutely, 100%. Well, ladies and gents, thanks again for listening in, and we'll catch you next time. As always, wherever you're listening to this, we appreciate your time, and if you have any comments or suggestions, feel free to get in contact and let us know. Until next time. Peace.